Welcome everybody to today's podcast. My name's Paul. I'm a very happy member of Cocaine Anonymous. I live in Peterhead in Scotland. I've been joined today by Anthony.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Anthony. I'm a grateful recovered drug addict and a grateful member of the 12-step program. I'm based in the West Country.
Beautiful. So today we're going to be doing part 2 of step 1. Step 1 is our admission and recognition of the problem with a view to locating a solution. In terms of the wording of the step, we admitted we were powerless over cocaine and all other mind-altering substances, and that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, as subscribers will be familiar, we already have a video on step 1. And I just played it back this morning in order to be in the light as to what we ought to perhaps look at today. So Anthony, before we get into this step, I'd like just invite you to share whatever's on your heart for a few minutes with our listeners.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll just qualify. My name's Anthony. I'm a grateful recovered drug addict and a grateful member of Cocaine Anonymous. And I don't say that come from a place of ego. I say that come from a place of humility, because it weren't always like that. I was of that hopeless variety, as it talked about. I was I am the real addict, and I crossed the line at a very early age, lost the power of choice. Then there was no choice, and it became a solution to a problem I didn't know existed, and that went on for over 3 decades. Lack of power was my dilemma, and in that interval, I tried to get recovery a couple of times. When I was 24, unfortunately, didn't get it. 33, I tried again. Unfortunately, I didn't get it. Consequently, I was out in the grips of active addiction, heroin, crack cocaine, prescription drugs, private doctors, national health doctors, prison doctors, and alcohol until I was 49 years of age. By the grace of God, I got directed to the 12-step program via a treatment center, and since that day, my sobriety dates February 2015, one day at a time. It's a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition, and I had to fully concede, and I had to make that admission in step 1 that I was 100% powerless and I was 100% hopeless. And that second part of step 1, accepting that unmanageability, that inner turmoil that was going on within me, as it talks about on page 52, the bedevilments, page 60, 61, the ego, the hypocrite, and page 62, selfish, self-centeredness is the root of the trouble, being driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. We step on the throes of our fellows and they seemingly retaliate without provocation. Not knowing anything about this stuff, the severity of this illness, not knowing that I suffered with an illness, that I suffered with a disease. I knew I was a drug addict, but I didn't know the nuts and bolts and the underlying issues, because it says it, alcohol is just a part of the symptom. We're getting down to the causes and conditions, and more will be revealed as we go along in this podcast.
Yeah, welcome to Cocaine Anonymous. If this is the first point of contact with us, we're not spokesmen per se, we're members carrying a message of hope, faith, and courage. I think the thing is to learn how to live free from drugs, to learn how to live without feeling the need to change how we feel and how we think, Anthony, and to grow in a new manner of life, through the power of the fellowship and the collective wisdom and the shared experience, the steps, the literature, prayer, meditation, and we become completely different individuals through this process. And I'd encourage anyone to, if they want to contribute to the conversation in the chat below this video. Certainly we can't cover every aspect around step 1 in a podcast, however much we would like to. We'll give it a good go though. So if you'd like to add anything, or you feel there's anything not covered, or you'd like to correct us, please do in the conversation below. There's no problem, and we'll try and respond. Also, there are about 16, 17 other videos on this channel. There's one on each of the steps. There's one on sponsorship. There's one on the spiritual malady, the problem and the solution. There's one on addiction, the ABCs, and there is one on an entire psychic change And our very first one was an introduction to CA program steps and fellowship. So please check out those and feel free to share them. You know, I think the idea is, Anthony, is that the change happens because we have faith and trust created in our hearts that what we hear and see in meetings, namely other people that have got free and are staying free from active addiction, it emboldens us and encourages us to try the same thing, which is really what step 2 is. You know, we come to believe that recovery, that God, that the program, that a higher power, or simply a dozen people who meet twice a week in a room, their collective shared experience and wisdom and the steps can liberate us from a life of alcoholism and drug addiction. Now, you know, you mentioned getting it in your lovely share, and I love listening to Anthony. And you know, you mentioned that. Well, I can't concur. You know, I did get it, but I chose to use drugs again. You know, I got it. I got whatever this mysterious it is. I got it many times. I lived clean and sober many times, but chose to use again. And this is the nub of the problem. I mean, you know, many people come in these rooms. Would to God, Anthony, that everyone that comes in 12-step rooms, whether it's NACA or AA, got clean and stayed clean for the rest of their lives. But you and I know that's far from the truth. You know, the reality is that only a small percentage do that. And the other reality is, you know, only a percentage of those that agree to go through the 12 steps actually do complete the 12 steps, you know. And so, you know, what's the nub of the issue? And that's what we're going to be looking at, because this podcast is about the first step. And, you know, the problem is, as I see it, Anthony, is a personality problem, a degree of non-acceptance of the realities of ordinary life. I'm not comfortable in my own skin sufficiently to stay free from inebriation. There's something in me, Anthony, that wants to get high or get low. If you use downers like heroin or Valium, and alcohol is even a downer. On initial consumption and inebriation, we often get high from alcohol, but eventually it's actually a downer. It's not that far removed from what's used to anesthetize people for operations. Scientifically and medically, alcohol, of course, being a drug, as we can see on the screen right there. So, I mean, Anthony, in terms of recovery and staying clean, you know, my suggestion to any listeners is come along to meetings, listen to people share their experience, strengthen up. On screen right now is a meetings list. These are just some of the meetings. Now, all these meetings on this screen are permanently going on all the time. I mean, at the top left, pop-up recovery, that meeting at the top left, pop-up recovery at 10:30, it's on right now. I was in there yesterday morning, Anthony. It's on every day. It's a great meeting. Pause this video. Do what you need to do. Take a screenshot of this screen. At the top right, daily reprieve, every single night of the week. You've been on there as well, Anthony. It's a great meeting, 9:30 UK time every night. Reaching out underneath that, 11 o'clock every night. Great meeting. Tarzana Baby's very strange name. Tarzana is a city over in America, by the way. So it's people who was at a face-to-face meeting who've gone on to Zoom. But that's a great meeting, midnight every night. We Can Recover, Anthony. You and I often attend that group. It's on twice a day, every single day, 2 and 8 p.m. UK time. So there's lots of meetings, and you can hear lots of messages that are full of faith, hope, and courage. So if you're listening to this video and you want to get free of drug addiction, Cocaine Anonymous is where you can do that and have a happier future. So without further ado, let's come to the topic of today's podcast. What have you got to say to us, Anthony, about step 1?
Well, step 1, you know, as you said there, walking into the meeting, you're kind of working step 1, you know, and getting into a meeting, whether it be on Zoom or whether it be physical. I mean, step 1 is about the insanity. You know, if you look at step 1, 2, and 3, the pertinent idea is that we're alcoholic, could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved us. 3, that God could have won if he was sought. But if you look at step 1, it's the insanity. It's I'm in whole, I got no power. There's a separation between me and the power. You know, and it's about making that admission and being honest, you know, and because it's crossing the river of denial. See, in step 1, I'm in denial. There's an emotional avoidance. There's an inner turmoil going on within me. But the nuts and bolts of it, because it's a threefold illness, is the main problem of the alcoholic or the addict centers in the mind rather than in the body. But the body is as abnormal as the mind. And then the other layer of it is the spiritual malady. So once I put that first one in, I've got no choice on whether I'm going to do that or whether I'm not going to do that, because it talks about it in the 12 and 12. The unaided will is insufficient. It's insufficient. I've not got a choice. My mind's going to delude me. It's going to trick me. I can't bring to my consciousness with sufficient force the suffering and the humiliation of even a week or a month ago. I'm always without defense against the first one. You know, and if you recap on that and go a little bit further back at the top of that paragraph, it says, for alcoholics' reasons you're obscure, I've lost the power to choose in alcohol. You know, so the step 1 is having no power. Right, so the first half of the step 1, I mean, it talks about it. It says fully conceding, which is the first step of the first step, to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics or addicts. You know, admitting that admission of the 100% of powerlessness and hopelessness, and then, you know, accepting the second half of step 1 and not being in denial about it, accepting to thyself be true. Right, accepting that my life's become unmanageable internally, which ultimately projects trajectory externally, and it comes out that way. So then, you know, I'm prey to misery, I'm prey to, you know, personal relationships. You know, I'm struggling in all them areas of my life, and I don't like what's going on within me. And I'm being driven, absolutely driven, you know, by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. And all I'm doing is anesthetizing myself with either heroin, crack, prescription drugs, or alcohol, or party drugs, whatever that may be. And my mind's tricking me. And there'll be times when I want to stop. I don't want to carry on doing it. But then my mind tells me it's going to be different this time. And it's never different. It's, you know, it's always the same. I lose the power of choice and I lose the power of control. There's no control whatever. I lose the power of choice and the power of control. Then it sets off a phenomenon of craving beyond my mental control. And then I'm on a spree. And I don't know how long the spree is going to last. You know, whether it's going to be a day, a week, a month, or a year, 5 years, 10 years. In my case, that spree went on for over 35 years. You know, and it's in that syndrome, like being on that merry-go-round, not knowing how to get off. Not knowing how to get off. And step 1's very pertinent when you look at it and what it says. We admitted we were powerless over cocaine and then the other mind-altering substance, and that our lives have become unmanageable.
Indeed so. And, you know, it's such a vast topic, isn't it, Anthony? And, you know, I mean, you know, there are dozens of ways to take people through these 12 steps. That's the reality of it. You know, I know people that have spent over 6 months on step 1. Right, I know people that have gone through all 12 steps in 4 hours. Both have stayed clean and sober, Anthony. Right, there are various ways to do these steps. I've heard people say they do steps 1, 2, and 3 in one telephone call, right, with a sponsee, right, and they've stayed clean. Personally, I think step 1 is worthy of at least a couple of hours of intensive work. Right, that's just my perspective. Some people say coming along to a meeting is step 1. Some people staying in a meeting is step 2, and intending to come back to a meeting is step 3. Some people say step 1 is I can't, God can, step 2. Step 3, I think I'll let him, I'm screwed, step 1. There is a solution, step 2. Step 3, I think I'll take it. So there are thousands of ways that and pretty much everyone in recovery would have a slightly different take on precisely how to work this step. Now I'm just going to share my experience very briefly that I'm going to try and expound upon further on. So it's about honesty and acceptance of the realities of my behavior in active addiction. Now, in what way am I powerless? Well, it is the reality, Anthony, that drugs become inculcated and that much part of my life that I live to use and used to live, no matter what the consequences, Anthony. The predominant factor in every day is that I use drugs, right? Now, regardless of the consequences, whether they're financial, mental, physical, spiritual, criminal, relationship, loss of jobs, unemployability, isolation, loss of family members, loss of access to children, brothers, sisters, parents, problems with neighbors, whatever the consequences, Anthony, we kept on using drugs. That is one of the definitions of powerlessness. The unwillingness within to change, right? Locked in that cycle of living to use, using to live, ways and means to get more. We live to use, and we used to live. Very simply, an addict is someone whose life is controlled by drugs. So I believe in step one, we need to get down to causes and conditions. As I said, I know people that spend months, in NA, for example, you can get masses of literature on step one, and all this information, the collective knowledge of recovery is out there today. Never before in the history of the world have folks have had as much access to recovery information and knowledge as they do today, So I think it's very important to look at the essence of powerlessness and the resulting unmanageability. Now, of course, it's interesting in step one, you don't have the term consequences, but it's very important to look at the consequences of active addiction, and when I'm working step one, I'm in the midst of working two step ones right now, as in today. There are various questions that I have folks answer, Anthony, and then we talk through the questions extensively. And this is to understand the problem. Unless I recognize the problem, why on earth would I need a solution?
I wholeheartedly agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
So just to wrap up what I'm sharing right now and let you back in, brother, is step one is the recognition of the problem. It has to be worked, as you said yesterday to me, Anthony. It has to be worked 100%. And that is the admission of powerlessness and the resulting unmanageability and consequences.
I wholeheartedly agree. There's different schools of sponsorship. There's different schools of sponsorship. As long as it's started with the first step and it goes in order, and continues to go in order. But step one is about, beyond human aid. So, as we know, there's no human power. There's not a consequence. If you're being driven, right, and that's what step one is, it's repeating the same mistake over and over again. Albert Einstein quote, where you can wash a pig like it returns to the mire, like a dog will return to its folly, falling prey to the liar, in the head, the illness, the disease, telling you it's going to be different this time, but when the spree starts and then the phenomenon of craving kicks off, you ain't got a choice. And you never had a choice in the beginning because there was a lack of power, right? Until that admission of powerlessness is made and hopelessness is made, and if you haven't, there's people that, have been through the steps and relapsed because they didn't have step one. They didn't have a step one. They didn't have a firm step one. A firm step one is the foundation. You spoke about I can't, you can, I will not, mine be done. The foundation and the bedrock of step one. Step one, as it says, is the only step that can be made with 100% admission. The other 11 steps are suggested ideals, right? But we got to work the steps. There's 12 of them, and they're like a clock. and they got to be. So I've got to make that conscious decision every day. It's just like when the Israelites were going through the wilderness, the manna that they were being fed from heaven rotted. So they had to go back the next day. It's the same thing. It's a daily reprieve. I've got to admit that powerlessness on a daily basis. I've got to admit that, on a daily basis. This is where the prayer comes in. This is where meditation comes into play. This is where, the principles, there's a principle behind every step. There's a prayer behind every step, and there's a promise behind every step. There's 36 principles, steps, traditions, and concepts, but they're all biblical tenets, right? So, when you look at the separation, right, because it is a separation being blocked to the sunlight of the spirit. So what the steps ultimately do, they help us identify as we're going through, making the admission, submission, restitution, and reconciliation, and then the maintenance steps where we grow. Because ultimately it's about identifying your defects of character, your assets, ascertaining an amends list, and objectively getting a relationship with the power. Because in step one, lack of power is the dilemma. Whether you want to call it a depraved mind, a debased mind, whether you want to call it a separation, it's an affliction. You understand? You're going to come to the end of self. And when you come to the end of self, that's when you're going to turn. But I know it tells us in the literature, I was drove here by circumstance, not by virtue. By God's grace, I got it. Because when I reflect back on my using and my boozing, and some of the situations that I put myself into, I could be dead. Or thank God I didn't kill anybody else or myself for that matter. Because that could have quite easily happened in crack houses, on front lines, behind the wheels of cars, being in some very sordid places, where people are being high on drugs. I'm high on drugs. Anything could have happened. Do you understand? Putting myself in, and then that's a lack of power. That's another form of lack of power, because I've lost the power of choice. And this is all about, identifying where you lost the power of choice and where you lost the power of control, and identifying the severity of the illness and what's going on within you. Step one, your powerlessness, your hopelessness, your unmanageability. It's clear-cut direction in this book and in this literature, or whatever fellowship you're in, whether you're in NA, whether you're in AA, whatever you're in. You can't water the literature down. It's clear cut what's happening and where you're going wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, you go to the medical view in the book, and what the medical fraternity, because the book is the granddaddy of all fellowships. Well, but I'm not getting controversial, because they all save lives. But you look what they say, neurologists, psychiatrists, and psychoanalysts, and what they're saying, and they were top people. Look at Silkworth. Talks about, Silkworth says it's about an entire psychic change. Ideals, attitudes, and emotions. So, and you look around, it's evident when you look around, it's working. It's only one thing for a chemical problem, and that's a spiritual solution. And this is what we have here. We have a spiritual solution in the 12 steps of Cocaine Anonymous.
Absolutely, we do. And I think very often, you spoke about the motivation to get clean, and well, I think largely that's a big part of step one. And often it's a conspiracy of circumstances, isn't it? And something of a mystery. Someone once said to me, treasure the questions, you won't get all the answers. If we've got clean, then in my opinion, it's far easier to stay clean than keep getting clean, and it's amazing when I look back, Anthony, different circumstances conspire together to put persons under enough pressure to at least have the willingness to get clean. And, that's another point I'd like to make. The only requirement for membership in 12-step recovery is a desire to get clean. Or I often think there should be a proviso in there, desire to stay clean. If you're already clean, then you have desire to stay clean. And that is it, period. There's no hierarchy. The only ground for membership is a desire to stay clean, a desire to get clean. And everyone's welcome. They're public meetings. There's nothing to sign, no promises to make. You can't really go wrong with meetings. You can't really go wrong with the literature. We use two books chiefly produced by Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the book on the screen right now. Is a book called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's about £14 from eBay and Amazon and elsewhere, including delivery. The secondary book we use is a book called The 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions, and that's the same price. Both can be read or listened to 24/7 at aa.org, and both can be downloaded as free apps on the Google Play Store. Now, step 1 doesn't use the word insanity, but step 2 does. And the steps are in order. So if you're listening to this, my suggestion would be to get yourself a sponsor. Check out our video on sponsorship. Me and Anthony raise many topics in these podcasts. And so, come along to meetings, check out the podcast, get yourself a big book and a 12 and 12. Read all about it. Now, step 2 speaks of we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So in other words, we get clear of the insanity that's revealed in step 1, the recognition, the honesty, the acceptance of our behavior and our feelings, that led us to and held us in addiction. And the nub of the issue was, for whatever reason, we wanted to carry on using drugs. And that is insanity. And the consequences get worse, never better. It is a progressive illness. And I've heard it shared, Anthony, that when we pick up again, there's no set of steps down to the bottom of the hole we just crawled out of. It's a sheer drop. We might cling on to the sides for a few days or weeks or even a month or two, but sooner or later we'll be right down at the bottom where we was, wondering what the hell's happened. And it's that lie and deception that somehow in a bag or a bottle or a wrap is something that God, our higher power, cannot give us, and it's been my experience that doing a little bit of adulting, a little bit of suiting up and showing up, a little bit of listening in meeting and trying to be present, sobriety, step work, sponsorship pays dividends.
Absolutely. Your lot's been cast into your lap, but the whole decision thereof is of the Lord. And if you look what it says, the only, it tells us spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And nobody's perfect. But the thing is, we know that we have a solution here. Steer is the captain's table. Don't discriminate a race, a creed, or a colour, or a walk of life. It's a common problem. It's a common solution. In a general way, what it used to be like, what happened and what it's like now is the A, B's and C's. Okay, and that's what we have here. Step 1, is the lack of power. It's the lack of power, right? So if I've got no power, what do I need? I need to get connected to some power, and ultimately, the steps are the vehicle that lead me to the power. And it's just amazing, really, when you look around how evident it is that it works if you work it. I never thought that I would get out of active drug addiction and that all that went with that way of life, being driven, absolutely driven, being selfish and self-centered to the core, not knowing that I was in a bondage of self, not knowing it had to be dark before the dawn, not knowing that, there is a solution. And that is in the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, getting someone that's armed with the facts and also the 12 and 12 who can navigate you through this work, give you directions, guidance and suggestions, and, which are the requirements of the program, and showing you how and what you've got to do. Then it's down to the individual to take responsibility and do that. It's down to praying. It's down to meditating. It's down to cultivating gratitude. It's down to cultivating consideration for others. It's down to, taking inventory, getting back going and making amends, and adhering to what the book tells us to do in the first 7 chapters of the book. There's clear cut, there's solution all over that book. There's solution all over the 12 and 12. And whatever fellowship you're in, there's solution. The green and gold was printed up in 2001. The basic text of Narcotics Anonymous came about and was established and publicised in 1953. The book was in 39, and then again in 55, the 2nd edition, 76, the 3rd edition, and 2001, the 4th edition. And if you look and just look at the preface, the forward to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, gives you all the historical information about the dates and the publications and the mushrooming effect that it had. And statistics on how many people have recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. So there is a solution here. So if anybody listens to this podcast and you're new, or you've just come back from a relapse, or you might have been drifting away from this program. There is a solution here, and that's doing the four suggested things and meeting the three sides of the triangle: unity, service, and recovery.
Absolutely. And, you know, people often ask, Anthony, I think it prevents people getting involved, getting a sponsor. What is sponsorship? Well, we've got a podcast on that. What does it mean to actually work through the 12 steps? So I just want to talk very briefly about that. So in the first instance, Anthony, I would have a conversation with someone, make sure that they're willing to go to any lengths and that they have a commitment to abstinence. And then we will begin the step work. And just very briefly, you know, so now we have these podcasts as an extra resource. I would ask the person to read at least a couple of pages each day from this very book that's on the screen, Alcoholics Anonymous, often called the Big Book. So that's what they would be doing each day. I would ask them to attend a meeting each day, preferably at least one face-to-face each week, but certainly a Zoom meeting every day, and listen and always introduce yourself and try and share every other day, however briefly, to connect with the group. Also to practice some form of prayer and meditation on a daily basis. Also have at least one piece of spiritual literature that you dip into every day, whether it's quarter an hour, 20 minutes. And develop these practices. Also develop a support group. Locate half a dozen people who you have some kind of connection with. You don't need to divulge your name or address or anything personal, just persons that you care somewhat about and care about you. We call this a support network. Now, all these suggestions work exceptionally well. You and I know, you know, they work very, very well indeed. So in the first instance, having established their commitment to abstinence and willingness to go to any lengths and willingness to commit to 12 steps of Cocaine Anonymous, I would ask them to read step 1, as well as the other reading I just mentioned. Read step 1 out of the 12 and 12. I would send them about a dozen questions that I have for step 1, and I would ask them to actually put actual pen to actual paper, not tapping away on some plastic device, pen to paper, and then send me the question and the answer for each of the dozen questions once you complete them all on WhatsApp, and then we will talk through them thoroughly. I would also ask them to check out the Step 1 podcast, and from this day forth, they'll now have to check out both the Step 1 podcasts, because this is the second one. So once they'd listened to the podcast, read step 1 out of the 12 and 12, read the doctor's opinion and start to get through the big book, we would then talk through all their answers to the step 1 questions. And once I had a thorough belief that they had an understanding of powerlessness, unmanageability and consequences, Anthony, I would ask them if they think they have, and if they respond in the affirmative, I would then say, well, next time we talk, I'd like you to have read step 2 out of the 12 and 12, read Bill's story out of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, listen to the step 2 podcast and answer the step 2 questions. And that's the way it rolls for 1, 2, and 3. 4 is in the form of sheets. So look, if you're listening to this podcast, do not be afraid of sponsorship. It's a very blessed thing to do, you know, particularly prayerfully, fearlessly and thoroughly. Now, I'm just going to put up something here, page 24. So back to you, Anthony.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. But a sponsor is just another alcoholic addict who is just someone who's gone a little before you, who's been armed with the facts, and it's been passed on to them, and they're going to pass it on to you. Now, you know, you got to make sure, you know, that the individual who's sponsoring has worked the program, is transmittable, transparent, and can navigate you through this literature, you know, and help you to prospects I work with, you know, I take them through, and there's various ways that, you know, an individual can be taken through, but you know, different schools of sponsorship. But basically, you know, when I take someone through the work, you know, I take them through from the preface to the first 7 chapters. But in that interval, you know, I give them print offs. I do loads of other stuff with them. I navigate them through the book. I give them a task to start reading the stories at the back as well, because I believe they're very pertinent. And there's a lot of solution in them as well. And in the appendices, the solution is solution all over the book, but the steps contained in the first 7 chapters. And I also implement the 12 and 12 in as well, you know, which is he co-authored that book with a guy called Tom Powers. It was published in 53. Him and Tom Powers fell out, so Tom Powers, his name was never put
You
to
love
the book.
you love your nostalgia, Anthony. Do
I
carry
do.
on.
I should have been a bit of an archivist, really, you know, because I do like the heritage. I like to know the heritage of things and the history of things and all that type of stuff. So I've been very fortunate in my recovery journey. When I first come about, you know, I had some spiritual big book gunslingers, and I'm a Christian, and who were put in my path, and I just thank and praise God for that. And, you know, and enlarging on my step 11 as well, with my faith as well, you know, because I know today that I've been plucked out of the pit. I've been plucked out of the miry clay. In More About Alcoholism, it talks about the pitiful, comprehensible demoralization. So if you're looking at page 24 now on the screen, and it says this: why all this insistence that every AA must hit bottom first? In the book, it talks about the desperation of a drowning man, the flimsy reading, the powerful loving hand of God on page 28 of the book. And then it says the answer is that few people will sincerely try to practice the AACA program unless they have hit bottom. A kernel of wheat must die before it can grow. So the jaywalker, the illustration of the jaywalker, his ego got smashed, it reconstructed. His ego got smashed, it reconstructed. His ego got smashed, it reconstructed. It talks about being beaten into a state of reasonableness until you turn. And it says, practice the AA program unless they've hit bottom. For practice, I know when I hit bottom, jails, institutions, dereliction, or death. Jails, institutions, which are psychiatric units, treatment centres, you know, secure units, you know, dereliction, losing the job, losing the wife, losing the car, or vice versa, getting separated from your children, you know, and death. It's a 1 in 3 ratio. A lot of people die down to this illness. It's the rapacious creditor. It's the rapacious creditor. You know, so I'm just trying to encourage you that, you know, it talks about it on page 25 of the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous, our beautiful big book. You can either go on to the bitter ends, jails, institutions, dereliction, or death, because it don't discriminate a race, a creed, or a colour, or a walk of life. It's a common problem. It's a common solution. There's 8 billion people on this planet, all suffer with pride and ego, but it's a bit more excessive and a bit more extreme and a bit more back to front thinking and double-mindedness in the real alcoholic or the real drug addict. And it says, you know, for practicing AA's remaining 11 steps means the adoption of attitudes and actions that almost no alcoholic who is still drinking can dream of taking. You know, there has to be an entire psychic change. The act of providence has to step in, has to be a divine intervention, and then the steps of the spiritual pathway to the power, you know, the power where the psychic change and the personality change and the inner change of the character. You know, we're like a lump of clay, and when we start working this and getting a relationship with the power, he breaks us, he makes us, he shapes us, he molds us, and he makes us. You know, the power that I understand or whatever power you understand. And it says, you know, it says 11 steps means the adoption of attitudes and actions almost no alcoholic is who's still drinking can dream of taking. Who wishes to be rigorously honest and tolerant? Who wants to confess his faults to another and make restitution for harm done? Who cares anything about a higher power, let alone meditation and prayer? Who wants to sacrifice time and energy in trying to carry the AA message to the next sufferer? No, the average alcoholic, selfish and self-centered in the extreme, doesn't care for this prospect unless he has to do these things in order to stay alive himself. Under the lash of alcoholism or drug addiction, we are driven to AA, and we discover the fatal nature of our situation.
Yes,
then and only
indeed.
then and only then do we become as open-minded to conviction and as willing to listen as the dying can be. We stand ready to do anything which will lift the merciless obsession from us. Trust God, clean house, and help others.
And I know many alcoholics extremely knowledgeable and extremely talkative. It's a wonderful process, the process of liberation.
Oh, it's you spot it, you got it.
From alcoholism, it really is. And you know, I mean, you know, I just want to talk briefly about something else. I mean, the reality is, Anthony, not everyone's using is the same. You know, the feelings around it and the desire to self-medicate and the feelings of a substance, pill, potion, powder, rock, giving like a warm blanket on a cold winter's day, a feeling of ease and comfort, a soothing, is a shared experience. But the reality is, some people are middle class weekend bingers, and other people are homeless crack and heroin addicts and burglars and that kind of thing. And although everyone, a sinner is a sinner, and an addict is an addict, and every human being thinks, says, and does wrong every day, and yet every human being is exceptionally precious. You know, power belongs to God. There is power, there is wisdom, there is strength, there is freedom, there is sobriety, there is deliverance from active addiction. Now, one of the things I just wanted to mention is that I find very, very useful. I think I mentioned earlier the things that I always have someone do in working step one, Anthony, for extreme cases, i.e. someone that's been using every day for years. I also have them, after having answered all those questions and done everything I just mentioned, write a powerlessness list, or a powerlessness writing, or a page, a powerlessness, an astute observation of their powerlessness, both feelings and circumstances, some writing on their unmanageability, and some writing on their consequences. Now, there's an overlap between the three, of course there is. Because of my powerlessness, these were the consequences, and that was unmanageability. So there is a lot of crossover, and the same with some of the questions. But writing these things down, and for many persons, Anthony, for the first time facing up to active addiction, you know, the consequences of our behavior, which are the consequences of our thinking. And I know you often share astutely on this, Anthony. Your thinking becomes your behavior, and your behavior becomes your lifestyle. So alcoholism centers in the mind, in our thinking, you know, and what happens is, in my opinion, my experience, you know, God's power comes in. We have right thinking and we have right living. But God's power is the difference. You hear people say, well, you can't live your way, you can't think your way into right living. Well, if God's power comes into your heart and mind, then you have a psychic change, a change of perceptions. You see the world and yourself and others differently. And the desire to medicate and to get high or get low, depending on your drug of choice, it's gone. It's removed, because you have the realization, whether it's gradual and educational or sudden and dramatic, you have that spiritual awakening, that vital psychic experience where your perceptions of the world and others and self change, Anthony. And I think that a solid step one is the very essence, the bedrock, the foundation stone for this recognition that is a springboard onto step two and the rest of the steps. What do you think?
Well, yeah, we got to go from, you know, the bridge of reason to the bridge of shore, from bridge to shore. So step one is the pivotal board onto, but, you know, if you look at the typology from page 21, it talks about the moderate, the hard, and the real alcoholic. It doesn't matter what walk of life you're from, right? You know, it don't matter whether you're from a council estate, middle class, or from a 15-bedroom, you know, or you come from royalty. It doesn't matter who you are. You're just another human being. You're just another being. You know, you're just another spiritual being having a human experience. And you know, the way I look at this, it doesn't matter. We all suffer with a threefold illness, you know, and that can manifest in various ways, you know. And so, you know, the steer is the captain's table. That's why it's in there about the equality and the diversity of the fellowship, right? You know, and it is ultimately about getting restored to sanity. It is ultimately being restored and made whole. And the only way that can happen is by God, right? It is by God. Okay. You know, if you look at what it says about step one, this is in the 12 and 12. It says, no other kind of bankruptcy is like this one. Alcohol now becomes the rapacious creditor, bleeds us of all self-sufficiency and all will to resist its demands. Once this stark fact is accepted, our bankruptcy as going human concerns is complete. So, you know, upon entering, you know, AA or CA, we soon take quite another, or whatever, view on this absolute humiliation. You know, we perceive that only through utter defeat are we able to take our first steps towards liberation and strength. You know, so when I'm weak, I'm strong. So, and when I'm strong, I'm weak. So I had to get humble and admit that I was powerless. And the God that I understand, he had to hear that. He, because it says, seek ye the kingdom and all his righteousness, and all shall be added unto thee. Ask, seek, and knock the door. So that's a thing that I have to do now on a daily basis. Because I never done that when I was in active drug addiction. The devil run me ragged, the illness run me ragged, the disease run me ragged. I had no power. Lack of power was my dilemma, in step one. So as soon as I made that admission that I was powerless and I was hopeless, and I accepted the second half of step one, then only then could I go from, it talks about it in We Agnostics, it talks about being on the bridge of reason, then it says going from bridge to shore in step two. I came to believe in a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity and take away, restore me to what the locust took, because it took everything off me, and it will take everything off you, no matter who you are or you think you are, whatever type of ego or persona or whatever mask you're putting on at this moment in time. It will bleed you of everything. It's the rapacious predator. So what I do suggest is that you get to a meeting, keep your ears open, hear what people are saying with the message, carrying the message, and get yourself a sponsor that's armed with the facts, and your life can start changing too.
Absolutely, Anthony. And, we're coming to the last 5 minutes of the podcast now. And, I was just thinking, the honesty and the acceptance that we have to and do exhibit in step one sets us in good stead to honestly work the rest of the program of action outlined in the 12 steps, outlined in the first 164 pages of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That's another interesting foundational reality of step one. It helps us to be thorough and fearless and honest with the rest of the steps, which result in a happier, healthier life, not just for us, but for our families, neighbours, and societies. And not only that, we're able then to carry a message of hope, faith, and courage to the next suffering individual. And we are a very broad church. That's the point I was attempting to bring to the attention of our listeners, Anthony. It doesn't matter. I've known people, Anthony, that drank for one night, came to 12-step recovery and have never drank alcohol again, right? I know people that were living on the streets for years. The souls of the trainers had worn away from walking around for hours every day trying to get the next 10, 20 quid, living in bin sheds, their feet growing into their socks. Okay. And they've become employable. They're now, those persons, real persons, right? Okay, are now working with a flat. One of them's, they're both friends of mine, but one of them I spoke with recently. I keep in touch with them both. He's recently got a vehicle, and then went and located another family member that was also living on the streets once he'd got clean after a month or two, and they're both doing exceptionally well. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, if you're listening to this message and you have a problem with alcohol, which is a drug, or any other drug for that matter, you can get clean and sober and stay clean and sober through the program of action available in Cocaine Anonymous. Now, bear in mind, if you go back to the beginning of this video, which you can pause and rewind at any point, there is a meetings list at the beginning. So do come along to a meeting. And, once again, Anthony, we've had a phenomenal time discussing the principles of step one. But I think you'll agree that it's such a thorough and deep topic, the topic of unmanageability. The nub of the issue is a personality problem, right? Why am I not comfortable in my own skin? Why would I want to get high every day or low every day? What's up? What's going on with that? What is the nub of the issue? And these are things we look at powerlessness. What part of my character was quite happy or content to allow all these diminishing circumstances, these ever decreasing circles, the problems of money, of relationships, of employability, of sanity, of health? Why was I prepared to embrace and allow all those declining circumstances, Anthony, to carry on using? These are the things we look at in step one, and give a proper understanding of the problem, which mean I appreciate the gravity and the solemnity and the seriousness of the need for sobriety and abstinence and recovery.
Wholeheartedly, I absolutely agree. Paul, it's step one. When you really do look at it, and you look at what's going on within, and it all, it kind of manifests guilt, shame, low self-worth, low self-esteem, and from that it can create self-arrogance, self-righteousness, selfish and self-centeredness is the root, and then pride comes in, and then the lust that come in. What I'm doing is I can't handle the way I'm feeling. I'm not comfortable within my own skin, and then what I do, I use heroin, crack, or whatever I use, prescription drugs or alcohol, to change the way I feel, but it's a false solution. So I still wake up feeling irritable, restless, and discontent, till I can again experience a sense of ease and comfort. Now, this was my experience for a very long time, and lack of power is the dilemma, the separation. So it's just like the forbidden fruit in the garden. As soon as they succumb to the fault, sin entered us. And that's where the battle goes on within, the battle of the mind, and it says the main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind rather than the body, but the body is abnormal as the mind. But there's another layer to it, as we know, and we've spoken about in previous podcasts, is the spiritual malady. And the only way I'm going to straighten that, says resentment from it stems all forms of spiritual dis-ease. If I'm at dis-ease, there's a separation. The distorted ego, the distorted personality, from that manifest selfish and self-centered fear. So basically, the nuts and the bolts of it all is that I trust God, I clean house, and I help others. And along that journey, I have a transformation within me. There's a conversion, there's a renewal of the mind. I start looking at things from a different perspective. I start seeing life from a different angle. The criminality goes, the merciless obsession for drugs and drink go. The layers of the onion, you will hear it in the room, the layer of the heart start. So the language of the heart, my creator can enter into my heart and transform me through this process of self-examination, prayer, meditation, cultivating gratitude, cultivating consideration for others, taking inventory, working the steps, starting my day on page 86 of the big book, and finishing it on page 86, and adhering to the principles behind the steps, and being willing, honest, and open-minded, and being with like-minded people, and when I'm talking to the newcomer, that power of identification with step one. I was just like you, lack of power was my dilemma for a very long time, but today I've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. But what I do today, it's today, and what I do tomorrow is tomorrow, and what I done yesterday was yesterday. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery. It's just for today. I could never rest on my laurels. Yesterday's victory is just what I do today. And I have to make that conscious decision on a daily basis to hand my will and my life over to the power. And I choose to call that power God. What do you think?
I think it's been wonderful. I always enjoy listening to you. I want to thank you for coming along today and recording this podcast with us for our viewers. We'll be back with another podcast in the near future. Please like and subscribe. Feel free to share the video. Please come along to a meeting. If you'd like indeed to be on one of these podcasts, let us know in the chat. Well, it's been marvellous. Thank you so much for your time, Anthony. That brings us to the end of today's broadcast. So without further ado, much love, family. Stay strong, stay with it, stay connected. You can do this. Thanks, Anthony. Are you there?
I am. Yep. Just to recap, it's been an honor and a pleasure as always. And, you know, freely you have received, freely give. We only keep what we have by giving it away. And we just hope and we pray that the seeds will be planted and they will land on fertile soil. And we just want to see you recover from a hopeless state of mind and body. And, you know, there is a solution here. Steer is the captain's stable, you know, equality and diversity. You know, we don't shoot our wounded, and our hands are always there to help you find the way out like we did. I'll leave it there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, family, we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening.